Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the IA Talks AI. My name's James King, and I'm your host for today. And joining me for this conversation, I'm joined by my colleague, Richard Normington, the Head of Trade and Investment at the Investment Association. Richard, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Washington, D.C.
Hello, yes, delighted to do so, and looking forward to the discussion that we have today on AI and the US approach.
Excellent. Well, Richard, if you don't mind me saying, you have a very interesting job and you split your time between London and Washington, D.C. Maybe we could start with hearing a bit from yourself about your role at the IA and what you get up to.
Yes, certainly. The key figure which comes from our investment management survey is that half of the assets that we manage is US owned or headquartered companies behind it. We also have almost half overseas clients. So considering those stats, it's very important for us to have a trade and investment agenda that looks at the UK's relationship with other jurisdictions around the world, that promotes the UK-based investment management industry. Previously, there were lots of roadshows involving funds, but they rarely talked about who managed those funds. And so part of what we're doing now is we're talking about the portfolio management and the expertise that's found in the United Kingdom that makes it a global center for investment management. And as part of that, we work with our Trade and Investment Committee for priority markets, such as the United States, but we also have China, the GCC, Japan, and other major markets in our sights. And we cooperate very closely with the Department for Business and Trade and HM Treasury and the Financial Conduct Authority, trying to bring down the barriers to business in those markets, to promote UK investment managers overseas, and to encourage international investment managers to look at the UK as the place to do their international business from. And it's a vote of confidence that such a large proportion of US firms and other international firms are in the UK doing that with us.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you for explaining a bit more about your role, Richard. So what really sparked the idea of us having this conversation was the publication back in July of this year of America's AI action plan. So this came out, and maybe we should start there. Could you tell us about the backstory behind this plan and where it all came from?
Yes, the place of AI in the new Trump administration was established very early on with the executive orders on artificial intelligence. It was followed up by two other executive orders in April about promotion of AI in literacy and literary proficiency across the economic competitiveness agenda, talking about national security, talking about how you upskill the US labor force. Essentially, when we talk about embedding AI into everything that we want to do, this is something that the administration is keen to do. And it looks at it from the lens of jobs. For the America First Investments approach, it looks at it in the terms of their economy and economic growth, and how economic growth is linked to national security. And all of those three things come together when you look at the proposals for AI, as it does with many of the other executive orders and actions of the administration over the last couple of months. The publication of the action plan, long awaited. The first initial Trump executive order was to actually get this action plan in place. One of the things that we found about the Trump administration is that it is running to a timetable, that things like the One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed on time, this document itself, when it was published, was on time. And it covers three specific areas of interest. One is essentially how the US wants to accelerate AI innovation. The second part is about how it's going to create the infrastructure, enhance the infrastructure to do it. And the third section talks about the leading role for the US in international AI diplomacy, because AI is something that is a topic of global interest, as is the governance of AI. And it's an area that I'm sure we want to explore further on.
Yes, absolutely. But maybe before we do, thank you for outlining sort of the key pillars of the plan. It would be good to understand to what extent this plan represents a departure from the approach that was being taken under the previous administration when President Biden was in place.
Yes, the the outlook of the Trump administration has been to talk about again the role of AI and AI dominance. They will talk about dominance of the U.S. economy, and it's also looking at how to create more of an open source approach rather than a closed source approach. The Biden administration's approach was it sort of open-endedly instructed federal agencies to use existing consumer protection laws to enforce things like fraud and unintended bias and discrimination. The Biden administration was seen to be much more interventionist, to be using the apparatus of the federal government and federal government agencies to promote an agenda, for example, DEI, that the Trump administration has explicitly said that it will tear down. And so the Trump administration has been looking at the economic side, whereas the Biden administration was very much on the safety side of the argument that we have about AI.
Right. Thank you. That's very helpful to understand. And of course, the US isn't the only jurisdiction that's been looking at action plans around how to sort of proceed and seize the opportunities that are up for grabs with AI. We've seen in recent times essentially equivalent plans within the European Union, also here in the UK earlier this year. So when we look at all of these various plans side by side, are there any areas of commonality and alignment? And also, just as interestingly, where perhaps do these plans differ in their approach?
Yeah, the commonality is that everyone has the ambition to become the AI superpower. And everyone recognizes that AI will change the world of business, it will change our society, it will change the way that we live. The question is, how do we approach that? Within the European Union, of course, you had the emphasis on restrictions, the emphasis on creating, prioritizing scalability and optimizing performance, but at the same time, you had the question about who controls it. The European Commission's role was seen to be quite interventionist compared to the US government's role in declaring the safety side of the debate. China, of course, has its own AI ambitions and its own AI policy, which for them, they focus on what they call the international alignment and areas that the international community can cooperate together. But that, of course, is seen by the US as a way of not emphasizing the capacity of the industry to innovate, but to look at ways of creating restrictions and limitations on business and others to get on with the key thing for them, which they would see as investing in innovation.
Right. And given all of this, what do you think this means for international coordination going forward when it comes to AI approaches and AI regulation? And where might that international coordination potentially start to become a bit more challenging going forward, given the slightly different approaches, the potentially competing agendas? And as you said, everyone's recognized or has the ambition rather to be the global AI superpower, but of course not everyone can be the winner. So what does this all mean for international coordination?
I think if you're on the business side of the equation, you will look very carefully as to which jurisdiction will enable you to innovate. You will also want to operate within jurisdictions to comply with what are effectively localization rules. And that will apply in the United States as well, because there was a thought that there'd be a moratorium on state innovation when it comes to AI regulation, but there are still considerable regulations in place within the United States as elsewhere. And you'll also find that some of the safetyism associated with the European Union would very happily find a similar outlook, perhaps in the state of Colorado, which has got the first framework coming into being in 2026. The big question, of course, for the global economy and the way that we operate is how will the United States and China relate with each other? There is no doubt that the Trump administration is determined to ensure that the United States is not dependent on China and that it is able to ensure its own economic security by not having a dependence on Chinese sources and also potential Chinese surveillance. Likewise, the Chinese model has got a strong talk about international alignment and cooperation, but it is, of course, at home running a closed society with AI innovations in ways that many people would find very difficult to handle, particularly when it comes to personal privacy and security issues. So there are some fundamental differences between the different jurisdictions. It will be up to us to try and navigate between them as far as the UK is concerned. But we have an economic relationship with the United States that was announced in earlier this year, with the possibility for greater Anglo-US constructive dialogue on things like fintech and the digital agenda. So there will be opportunities ahead for the United Kingdom as part of the traditional Western alliance of democratic states.
So it sounds like we need to watch this space then. But in what areas would you be perhaps the most optimistic about the potential for various jurisdictions around the world to come together and actually see eye to eye on matters of AI and how to regulate it?
I think that those areas that are the ones that are being localized, perhaps, are the ones that most people would expect. Actually, there are very good reasons to have some differing approaches, but nevertheless a degree of interoperability across the systems. And it's the interoperability side that will come to the fore. You know, can I use these systems in this particular jurisdiction? What's required? Can you make it so that I can just flick a switch and plug in? And actually, that's where the AI will come into its own for those who want to enter those markets. There will also be continuing interests in things like the cybersecurity agenda. There will be counter-terrorism measures. There will be those forms of cooperation where it's in the interests of all governments to take on some of the ills of society that AI is just going to bring forward in a new manifestation, but have always been there before.
Well, good stuff. Good to hear that there is reason to be optimistic that a good level of cooperation will be achievable in the future.
I think so long as we're clear about those areas and where we can move forward, and also understand where there will be those distinctions between societies that will make them impossible to go across.
And Richard, I wanted to come back to something that you've already touched on briefly in your earlier comments, and that was around the internal AI regulation landscape within the US, because, of course, it's a federal system, so you've got the federal government, and then you have 50 individual states who are passing their own laws, and it does appear, from an outside perspective, that the development of AI regulation in the United States has been complicated somewhat by the, perhaps competing priorities of the federal government and individual states. And it'd be good to hear from you about how this dynamic has been playing out so far and what we might expect in the future.
Yes, the debate during the one big beautiful bill as it was going through, whether you would have a purely federal approach, what degree of latitude the states would have with their AI regulations. It was an important part of the conversation. But I would also make the distinction that quite a lot of the conversations with the states, I mean, we've had over 1,000 bills through the various states, and about 40% of them get passed. But they are things dealing with deep fakes. They deal with election integrity. They deal with some regulation, transparency in hiring. There are quite a few things where the states already have their own laws, and so that federal structure is just being mirrored through some of the regulations that come through. There will be, of course, the federal link for funding, where if you're seen to be introducing something that is overly burdensome and extraterritorial, then you can expect that the FCC and others will intervene in this. But it's also a separate discussion from the what are we doing as the United States to encourage innovation and to encourage the US to have the infrastructure, the energy, and the encouragement and the training to make a success of AI in the future. And the reason they do that is because, as you're probably well aware in the conversations that you have, AI as such can be transformative. And for example, a lot of the discussions about the defense use of AI, nevertheless, you can then move that into the manufacturing, the supply chains, the logistics. You look at it and how it could be used to revolutionize transportation and cybersecurity and energy policy, because the US, one of the big questions is how's the electricity grid going to run? How's it going to connect to each other? And how do we, in the United States, avoid doing a Spain and discovering that half the country's lost its electricity overnight? So there are some discussions in there which aren't to do with state regulation, but are much more national questions that the Trump administration is trying to answer through both its publication and through legislation as well. One area, of course, that would affect the media, of course, is the approach to free speech, for which they place a great value on. And there are conversations at the moment with other states about how AI is used for free speech and limitations as they see it that could be placed on US firms operating on US soil, but extraterritorially being drawn into to other conversations elsewhere and potential litigation. They're looking at finance, for example, how to access how do you scale up, and the role of financial services in scaling up some of the AI offers as they come through. They're very much into that sort of try first dynamic as part of the American approach. There is that innovation, and that's what they want to encourage. And then it comes to a question about how American workers are treated and what the opportunities are as jobs and skills will change over the years. And actually, the jobs and skills thing is an area where we can have a very good conversation about what can be done as all of our societies. We have a number of challenges that we talk about. For example, we'll always talk about the pensions issue that's coming up, the demographic changes, but actually the skills challenges for the coming decades and AI's role in that is one that is of a universal interest and will certainly be a matter for international conversations.
Well, it certainly sounds like it's a very complicated situation. And forgive me for putting you on the spot, but it'd be good to get your opinion on, what firms can do to, stay abreast of what's happening and try to navigate the way forward, and what their response as companies will be to all of this, apart from listening to the IA Talks AI, of course. Any suggestions, Richard?
Yes, I think the try first is probably a good message. There is a lot to be said for just getting out, seeing what's available in terms of AI, how it can transform the way that we're doing business, and also when it comes to the question of how we're organized, what are we going to do with the new AI and how will it affect hiring in the future? Portfolio management is the key, the jewel in the crown of the UK's investment management industry. It is that ability and that expertise that makes the UK an international centre. AI will improve the ability of portfolio managers to do their business and to provide the returns that the pensioners and others require of them. So there is a lot to be said there. But then, how do we deal with entry level and people coming into the industry and ensure that they get the same sets of skills and some of the hands-on expertise that only comes with real work and a real understanding of what lies beneath some of the AI generated material that may be turning up on your screens. There's always that thing about you should always double check, and AI. I had one yesterday. I asked about opening the opening words of Richard III, and was confidently told that those words were actually the beginning of Hamlet. And that's purely because it was spoken by the same actor. So yeah, we've got to get that training right, and we've got to be open to innovation, but also to be aware of where the liabilities are, and that some of the safety mechanisms that we put in place are there, and the protections that we would want for investors to have are still in place, and that they're not sacrificed on the altar of a quick keyboard flick.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great message on which to end. So, Richard, thank you so much. That's been a fascinating conversation. So many rich insights there. I'm very grateful for your time. And thank you, everybody, for listening. As you've heard, the raging global public policy debate about AI is only getting more interesting. So we'll be returning to this topic again in the future. Please do join us for that. Thank you.
Thank you.